Hi everybody, and welcome to this episode in the Ad Valorem Group Lumina series of technical webinars. And today I'm pleased to revisit an earlier topic which covered that of R&D tax credits. I'm joined by a stellar panel of guests, so without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Glenn Collins, the ACCA's Head of Technical and Strategic Engagement, Suzanne Clements, Head of Ad Valorem Group's R&D Tax Team, and last but by no means least, Panos Farantatos, who's our Senior Technologist, again at the Ad Valorem Group. So jumping straight in, the R&D landscape continues to move, admittedly not at the speed it did, say, a couple of years ago. But Suzanne, just to start us off, how has the landscape changed, particularly over the last couple of years as the market's calmed a little bit?
Well, as you say, things coming together just to make the R&D tax credits landscape one of the most challenging areas of UK tax to specialise in. So we had this continually shifting field as the schemes, rates and criteria were altered by successive governments, and that all culminated in this move to the merged scheme and ERIS. We've got more stringent, time-sensitive reporting requirements. And we've, of course, had this extremely difficult compliance environment where claims were at a far higher risk of HMRC picking them up for inquiry. And these sort of measures, which were meant to deter fraud and error, quite rightly, have meant that actually compiling claims has become significantly more resource intensive for companies and their advisors. And there's also been the negative press around the schemes, which have made this quite a difficult market to negotiate with clients, some of whom are quite concerned by it. And we've also had the bar raised for us in terms of PCRT, professional conduct in relation to taxation. But basically the purpose of R&D tax relief hasn't changed. It's still a key government incentive. It's designed to support and encourage innovation and growth in the UK. So for companies that are investing in R&D, they've still got that opportunity there to claim these valuable reliefs, which can make a big difference to their tax position. The only difference really is that now claims have to meet a higher standard because they're going to be subjected to more scrutiny. So in this sort of environment, a claim has to do a lot more than just meet the eligibility criteria. It has to do that in an evident way. It has to withstand scrutiny. And that means having really clear identification of that project activity, the qualifying expenditure, having clear evidence-based narratives, which are in line with the DSIC guidelines, which are the statute that define R&D for tax purposes. And the costing methodologies have to be consistent, defensible, clear. So all of those things have to come together now just to meet those higher standards of scrutiny that we've come to expect.
Interesting. And is that a different aspect to before, or have they really just looked at looked at what was originally put in place and perhaps paid more focus on it and over the, the extensive investigation process, refined their angles?
Well, as you know, at one point in the past, an R&D tax credit claim could be nothing more than figures on a return. There was no requirement to submit the additional information form, which was brought in so that HMRC had some information about the projects that were being claimed for. At Ad Valorem, obviously, we've always supplied a narrative report with our claims, but not every advisor did that, which is why the AIF was introduced. So, obviously, the schemes themselves go back a long way. The The SME scheme was first introduced in 2000, with the large company scheme a couple of years after that. And they were seen as a real flagship tax credit regime, which was attractive to overseas investors and things like that. This was, the international model for supporting investment in R&D. And then for many years, the governments were tinkering with the schemes, perhaps here and there, but the changes were always positive ones because the schemes were seen as basically a good thing. But then sort of late 2020, early 21, all of these factors began to come together, which just had this massive negative impact on the schemes and how they were perceived. And I think, it all boiled down to the really overly light touch compliance framework, lack of operational oversight by HMRC. And that led to this market that just encouraged, or at least didn't deter, really poor compliance in some areas. So we had, advisors who just saw the opportunity to file inflated claims, knowing they weren't going to be challenged.
I know that it was a big frustration with a lot of the providers, the genuine providers. Glenn, are you seeing at a higher level? Obviously, it's been under a lot of scrutiny, and we've spoken about it obviously on a number of occasions. Are you seeing a more how can I put this, a more welcoming view now from HMRC in terms of, they're looking to support innovation, or is it still seen as quite a combative environment?
I think when we're looking at the entire framework across in the UK, from the UK government, which filters then down into the separate departments, you're seeing a concentration on growth, on innovation, on the areas the UK actually excels at. And that can be from, the well-heralded university rollouts across to individual companies with great business owners looking and saying, actually, how can we innovate? How can we drive something forward? There is a strong recognition that actually exists there about the UK being in a very good position for that. HMRC has some challenges. It has that view of innovation and growth, and that is definitely filtering through some of those teams, and they are very open to that as an important factor. And then there's the area where they are held accountable, that is for the protection of the exchequer. And so when they're looking, they have that as that overarching element that sits there very strongly of actually how do we protect the exchequer.
Interesting.
I think as we all know, there can be frictions between those, and where you see abuse of the system, you actually see the sway going through to actually what do we need to put in more greater force in place to actually make sure that element is reduced. But you also see that push for growth and that push for good growth, because with that, we all know come additional taxes, come additional employment, and actually filters through with additional inward investment coming into the country. All of those feature very, very strongly in the overarching industrial strategy, within the trade strategies, within the small business strategies going forward. HMRC is not immune to that. And I think especially under the new leadership, they are actually seeing that stronger coming through.
Excellent. Well, I mean, that's encouraging stuff. And I think, albeit it was, as I say, it was very much a one size fits all, and the hammer came down on everybody. I think you've got to welcome, from a business perspective, you have to welcome a tighter regime and a clearer regime, because it was clearly abused at the time. I know we're going to talk about PCRT. Perhaps we can touch base on that a little bit later. But just sort of going back, getting a bit more granular, maybe. Panos, you're chief technologist here at Ad Valorem. Has the definition of what counts as R&D changed at all? From your experience.
To be fair, the definition of what is R&D for tax purposes has not changed. Potentially the translation layer that has evolved over time, given different changes in HMRC's compliance landscape. However, the definition has always been the same. And at the technical level, when we are conducting a claim process, this really comes down to the judgment of the competent professional, which is central to the DSIT guidelines. What matters actually is whether someone with the right technical track record and domain expertise can say, would not know at the outset whether this is technologically feasible, or we may know it's feasible in principle, but we do not know how to achieve it in practice without experimentation, iterative development, or technical problem solving.
I think we hear that word competent professional a lot.
Yes.
And I think probably one of the benefits, certainly I think that we've seen through our discussions with HMRC, is perhaps a little bit more clarity. It was always woolly as to exactly what constituted a competent and professional. Definitions changed from what HMRC considered to be a competent professional to the reality. And I think there was a few cases where it started to identify that definition a little more. So a question that we're often asked is, where's the line between sort of genuine R&D and routine development? Because I think that is certainly an area that we get asked a lot of, and it was certainly an area that perhaps was pushed, a boundary that was pushed quite a lot in the old days.
So to follow up on whether something is uncertain if it can be achieved in practice, or it could be achieved based on first principles, but uncertain how this evolve over time during the development stage, during technical work. This is where the concept of technological uncertainty starts to emerge. So once the company, the technical persons that are leading a technical effort in a company are uncertain on the practical feasibility of the final technical outcome, this is where the line is drawn, where genuine R&D for tax purposes in principle could happen.
Interesting. So, I mean, I think from a strategic, a technical position, probably the thing that's changed, certainly for a lot of accountants, is it's not just about the tax. The tax is almost, a factor. The most important thing is actually understanding the development and understanding the clients, what the client is doing to a highly technical level, which, let's face it, as accountants is probably outside of our skill set. So I guess the big thing for you, how important is it to involve a technical team properly when putting a claim together, not just in-house, but also from your professional advisors?
It is fundamental in being able to submit a compliant claim. So a robust R&D claim sits at the intersection of technical judgment, financial discipline, and regulatory understanding. So if you do not involve the technical team properly, there is a real risk that the claim becomes financially structured without enough technical interrogation. Equally, if the process is driven only by technical enthusiasm without proper financial and compliance discipline, the result can be poorly scoped or disproportionate. So the strongest outcomes come from integrating both perspectives properly.
Brilliant. Well, we've certainly seen many situations where entrepreneurs believe everything they do is R&D. And we just need to be able to, and some of it is and some of it isn't. We just need to be able to work that through. Suzanne, from your experience, what is HMRC looking for in a claim in today's world? When we're submitting the reports, what are the key areas that do you think that, when yourself and Lisa are looking from a QA perspective, you're looking for? What are the buttons you're looking to push?
I think you have to assume that whoever within HMRC is going to be looking at this claim is going to be scrutinizing it. So the claim has to answer questions that somebody looking at it critically would be asking. If they're reading this thinking, does this look right? So it has to be really clear, really informative, It has to show what was done, why that work qualifies, how the costs have been tracked and recorded, as well as the work, and how the qualifying expenditure has been identified from the records. So there mustn't be any red flags, unanswered questions, or any sort of disconnect between what's being described in the narrative about the project work and the costs that are being claimed. It has to hang together and make sense. And obviously, it also has to show that it's navigating all of the complexities of the criteria for claiming, the changing legislation, the DSIT guidelines for that particular accounting period, because there's been so much change. So that all has to be done in a way that gives HMRC that comfort that the person putting this claim together knows what they're doing and that it makes sense. So that's our whole purpose when we're putting the claims through QA. I'm looking at that with the sort of mindset of an HMRC inspector looking for risks. So the claim has to show that those risks aren't there, as long as the caseworker from HMRC is getting the answers that they want from that material, then they'll have no reason to open an inquiry. But if they're reading it and they're thinking, well, that doesn't make sense, or have they, is that correct? Then all of the sort of preemptive questions have to be answered.
So it is very much an approach of, a 100-page report is not actually going to be very powerful. A 2-page report, or even a single-page report, is providing it answers the questions. Because of course, a lot of the guys that are looking at this from HMRC, they're not technical. So we have to navigate that very challenging area of taking sort of what can be quite technical work and challenging work, and putting it into a format that really answers the questions that HMRC are looking for. And that's very much an area that I know you and Panos work on, and Lisa worked on Ad Valorem.
Yes, well, it's interesting, Nigel, that you say, the people looking at this may not be technical. So, obviously we've had compliance activity in the recent past, and that was part of a special project run within HMRC's individuals and small business compliance stream, which came out of their mandatory random inquiry program, which was all about tackling this perceived fraud and error. But that could be set to change. We were actually told in March's RDCF meeting with HMRC that they now feel that they've addressed those key risks through all of this bulk compliance activity that's been such a headache for people. They feel that they've reduced error and fraud through that program of mandatory random inquiries and the highly automated style of inquiry that was causing people so many problems. So because of that, and because they're seeing this general trend of fewer, larger claims, compliance work's being more focused now, so we were told, into their mid-sized business streams. So they're evolving away from that bulk compliance work, and it's now being resourced through an expansion of mid-size. So some of those project staff might be moved into mid-size to supplement that work, but that project team's not going to be opening new cases. It's just working the current ones to closure. So we're going to have these new mid-sized teams, and that means that they're going to be following mid-sized ways of working. This is, the business stream where you would have individual case ownership. So they're likely to be more qualified staff. They're likely to be interacting on that one-to-one level. The process won't feel automated and task-based like it has in the recent past. So, and they'll be looking at risks, but these will be more complex risks of higher value, we're told. So we can expect inquiries to be more focused, to be more detailed, to be run by people who are more highly trained in the legislation. And so that's really my expectation, that their new risk review focus will be on those areas of change, those areas as we move into the merge scheme that have changed. For example, restrictions for overseas expenditure, upstream and downstream contractual arrangements, all of which have shifted again. So whereas in the past those bulk compliance teams might have just been rejecting claims on first principles, this isn't R&D. Now we're probably going to see a more finance-based approach. So that could be quite a change.
So it's almost coming a full circle. I remember the old days. Obviously, we've been doing R&D claims at AdVal for many years now, where you could actually have a sensible conversation with somebody at the end of the phone who actually understood what you were talking about. And you can actually, rather than having to wait for a series of letters, you could actually get to the issue and obviously get the relief to the recipient company in an acceptable time frame. So that sounds like a positive thing. I know also, if I could perhaps bring Glenn in on this, one of the big areas that's being emphasised at the moment in terms of scrutiny is obviously PCRT and those people that can engage with HMRC. What's your view? First of all, if you could give us a little bit of a background just for the audience generally on PCRT, because hopefully it's familiar to most people, but perhaps those people that aren't involved in R&D or those sorts of, I mean, generally it's not specific to R&D, but you know, it may be a good idea if you give a little background of what does PCRT actually mean, and what does it mean in the context of our conversation with R&D at the moment.
Sure, more than happy to do that. PCRT, professional conduct in relation to taxation, is an extension of those professional ethics that actually exist there under the IFAC code. These are some tax specific areas. They do draw on some of those fundamental principles, and that's integrity, objectivity, professional compliance and due care, confidentiality, and professional behavior. And I think that's probably really important to actually draw out each of those principles and apply them across, because you will end up with the best result there. One element which always sits in my mind is actually on tax planning and arrangements, and that's really around, well, actually, is it something you feel confident and you can do and you can undertake? But actually also, is it something you'd actually stand by? And does it actually make good business sense? And I think when we're coming back to those elements, including around R&D, some of that is, does it make good business sense? And I think quite often then, when you apply that view through that particular prism, you end up with the right result coming through. So I think that there is an important element which sits here, and that is around the good professional standards and ethics. And yes, HMRC do look at those and do actually say, well, these are the principles we would want people to follow. They are across for professional accountants, and they recognize that in the audience that they're actually dealing with. And they also expect from some of those elements, and something Susan was saying earlier, is there's an important element of a two-way communication with HMRC around elements of risk and around that honesty and straightforwardness in your interaction with them. But actually also, I'd add in there, if you see bad behavior, people within HMRC want to raise those standards as well. they don't want to see outliers. They want a consistent approach coming through, and they want to know you're actually receiving that consistent approach. So there are elements when you're looking at those fundamental principles coming through, actually use professional bodies also. You know, if you're seeing bad practice coming through, highlight that coming through. Equally, if you're seeing bad practice in the marketplace, highlight it through. If you're seeing bad practice at HMRC, highlight it through. Those, would I say, would be some of those fundamental principles which sit there and apply across to PCRT in our own conduct, but actually also those we should hold others to account for. So PCRT, we've also done a number of different worksheets on areas, and some of those obviously interlink with one another. There has been since 2020, there's been a good R&D set of guidance which actually sits there. Recently this year, with some of the updates we've done, we've got a new AI module that sits there, and that looks at ethical behavior and appropriate use of AI and safeguards, and has some of those practical elements and applications coming through. So I'd say don't just pick out one, look at them as a whole and actually apply them as a whole within the business.
No, I think that's really interesting. And I say, speaking as a practitioner myself, I could sort of throw something in and say, it's not sufficient just to say, to have a letter from the client saying, I'm doing this off my own bat. It's not, and there's no reliance on you as a professional. You have an ethical requirement to ensure that the information you're submitting to HMRC is compliant. So a message to other practitioners: if you are filing corporation tax returns with R&D attached, or your clients are using R&D providers, it's your responsibility as well to do some due diligence on that individual, on that firm, to ensure that they will be able to meet professional standards and standards that you yourself would be happy with. Doesn't mean you have to understand everything they're doing, but you should look into those individuals and ensure that whatever you're doing as a professional meets your professional standards and obviously the PCRT guidelines set down by the necessary regulatory body. Really good stuff. Thanks, Glenn. It seems like we've spoken years and years about this, but it does gradually, slowly, HMRC are beginning to recognise the importance of having professionals working directly with them. So we might get there before my retirement. No, I don't. It won't be before my retirement. We might get there where the accountant becomes a protected word, which would be great.
Well, that would be really great, Nigel. But I think that there is an important aspect to also bring out from that, and actually, don't be afraid to tell them what you do, and tell them, actually, these are the processes we have in place. This is what we do as an organization. Because how else would you gain visibility? I know a few people have come out that have been amazed at how we've had a variety of different firms. They've been amazed at some of the work that the professional practices actually do on that particular front. So again, I would encourage people to say, actually, these are the standards we work to. This is what we do that you won't necessarily see coming through there. And that, as we know in any risk analysis, that provides you with an element of assurance and reassurance that actually the people you're dealing with are providing through some of that reliable information through to you.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important. I mean, what's coming through to me from this conversation, and perhaps I could fire this back to you, Suzanne. There's three key elements here. There's HMRC expectations, there's technical evidence, and compliance. From your experience, when we're looking at claims, are those sort of like three broad headings we're looking for? And have you, certainly from ones that we've taken on, and say as a result, unfortunately, of some of the other providers in the market closing down as a result of the change in the regime, we've taken clients. Are you seeing those areas those boxes not ticked on the reports that we're seeing that are
Oh,
currently in the inquiry?
yes, absolutely. And I think, claims do sometimes fall down just because those elements aren't properly joined up. Um, so, for example, for some topics, if you have an advisor who's not really embedded in R&D as their main focus or specialism, then they wouldn't be aware of the sometimes quite convoluted changes in HMRC's view of certain topics, like subcontractor status, which has changed again in the move to the merge scheme. So yes, a claim could be challengeable if an advisor is not clear about HMRC's evolving view, and how that's actually reflected in the CURD manual guidance, which is just HMRC's interpretation of the legislation. So that can be really crucial, especially in the transition period when we still have some claims under the legacy schemes while others are moving into the reformed reliefs. And that, for instance, that question, whose R&D is it? Who's entitled to claim? When you've got a contract or an arrangement between parties, whether it's upstream or downstream of the claimant, that's not straightforward, and that comes up really frequently. And the rules are different between the legacy and the reformed schemes. So you've got different legislation, different CURD guidance, which, an inexperienced advisor could quite easily lose their way in. And it's quite possible for a compliant claim in one period to no longer be compliant in another period, in the same circumstances, and vice versa. So, from what Glenn was saying about PCRT, for us, tax planning, that element of PCRT, that must be based on having a realistic assessment of the facts and a credible view of the law. So for R&D claims, that means that our assessment of whether that project's eligible under the statute and the legislation, that has to be fully defensible. And we have to draw clients' attention to areas where the law might be uncertain in a material way. And that means being aware of things like evolving case history, tribunal judgments, the circumstances that gave rise to those, and HMRC's evolving views on particular topics. And you can't do that if you're not embedded in this as a specialism.
Mm, mm. Interesting, very interesting. I mean, you touched base there on inquiries, so let's have a little bit of a chat around inquiries. First of all, I mean, obviously, very well publicised HMRC approach, which was I think 1 in 5 claims will be inquired into. We're not seeing that now. I mean, I think it was a general, as I said earlier, sledgehammer to crack a nut. Fortunately, all our claims were defended, which was great, and big kudos to the team for that. But let's say we've said it's going to move to mid-size. You're still going to get inquiries. I think that the inquiries now will not be scattergun. Is it something for a client, if they get an inquiry, to be worried about? And what approach would you adopt in the event of a client receiving an inquiry?
Well, not worried so much, I think, but there has to be this awareness that claims do have to meet a higher standard now. So it's all about risk. So HMRC is looking at that claim, asking, is there a risk to the exchequer that it's going to be paying out more here than it should? So the caseworker is looking at that claim, and if they see something that they don't understand that could significantly affect the quantum, then they have to open an inquiry to ask questions. So, if you're looking for, practical things to do to mitigate the risk of an inquiry, then obviously you have to show your workings. You have to evidence how that claim's been compiled. You have to make it clear that it is compliant by showing that the project work meets the DSIP guidelines, the costs meet the requirements of the legislation. Just put yourself in the shoes of a reviewer, prepare it as though you're criticizing it. And as an advisor, don't push the boundaries, because you could be exposing your client to stress, uncertainty, resource cost of an inquiry, with consequences for their financial position and also for their reputation, which again comes back to things we must be mindful of under PCRT. So yes, I think as an advisor, I would always be asking the question, would I be prepared to defend this claim to HMRC? And the answer must be yes, or you shouldn't be filing it.
Interesting. No, I mean, again, it seems that the messaging coming across is, don't cut corners at the start and hope to wing it, because in this environment, that's not going to happen. So I think the message I'm hearing is now more so than ever, do the legwork up front, submit the reports in a proper format, try to preempt all those questions that a proper professional will answer and will be aware of, and present a report that allows the HMRC to be able to review and assess risk. Really, really interesting. Thank you for that, Suzanne. Really important. Glenn, what are the commercial aspects to what we're actually doing here?
I think that's one of those real fundamental areas, Nigel, because you've got to keep your client also informed, as well as dealing with all of the HMRC inquiry through the entire process. Even before you're looking at making a potential claim, you've got to look and got to discuss some of those commercial realities with the client. And actually, they also need to enter into things with that open view. Additionally, one of the important aspects that comes out from that is you wouldn't want a client coming back to you at a stage and saying, why didn't you tell me about R&D? Because actually it could have accelerated things for me. It could have made a difference to my business. But I do think that there's a real commercial aspect of both pre any R&D claim and the good client care that actually sits there as some of those fundamental principles of due care that come through from professionals, but actually also leading through to, okay, this is a process that could happen. So somebody enters into it with a open view, and some may go, actually, that potential risk, I'm not really interested in that. It would cause me so much hassle. I don't want to do it. But actually, equally, a number of them will go, yes, I can see the real benefit of this. This is what I want to do. If it does arise, then they'll actually deal with that. But they're partly prepared beforehand. So I think that commercial discussion is really important to have up front, and important for all professionals to have up front with those clients.
No, I think it's important. I mean, we've spoken to some practitioners at conferences, and the response has been, well, we just don't talk about R&D because we don't understand it, and we're worried about our professional reputation. It's not a reputation thing. I think it's about finding providers that you've done due diligence on. But I think you're right. It is about presenting it to clients because it is an innovation. It is about innovation. It is what the government promoting. It is there. It's not a tax scheme, as has been, sort of alluded to in the dark days. So I think it's a really important benefit to business. I think it's important to the economy. The government, as you say, are promoting it, which is fantastic. And I think as practitioners, even if it's not a specialism we've had, if we have clients that we believe may be eligible, team up with a body, with a provider that you're comfortable with and who has the necessary qualifications and background. Ask the question. I think everything, whenever we speak to practitioners, the most important thing for a practitioner is their clients. At a commercial, but also, at an emotional level, and you want the best for your clients. So I think the messaging I would always have, and when I'm speaking at conferences and what have you, is have that, keep that dialogue. Don't close your mind to it. Keep the dialogue open, but just make sure you have a network around you of people that you're comfortable with and can work all off the same page. Really interesting stuff. So I think we're drawing to a close. It's been a really interesting catch up, and thanks everyone for joining. I guess just as we always tend to do with the Lumina podcast, it's one for each of you, if I may ask, a quick tip. What's the one thing that you would say to listeners who are either do R&D or may have clients that do R&D, or indeed are FDs who are working within businesses that they have an R&D claim? What would be that one thing to say, this is the most important thing? It may be a technical perspective, it may be a flag, whatever. Suzanne, can I hit you with that first?
Yes. Well, find an advisor who really knows what they're doing and can get it right for you. But remember that R&D tax relief is a really important part of your company's tax position. If you're entitled to claim, you should claim, because this is designed to support companies' investment in R&D and boost the UK economy. It's there to help companies that are putting money into moving forward, which we need. So find the right tax specialist. If they know what they're doing and they can put you together a robust, defensible, compliant claim that's correct, that's going to go to HMRC and is not going to raise any red flags for them, then go ahead and do it. And don't be put off by the negative press, because we've been over that phase in the past. Largely, it's been resolved. HMRC feels that it has addressed that period where it was very worried about fraud and error. There have been one or two heads on spikes. So we've now got to the point where the advisors that are left standing should be the good ones. The advisors that have weathered this storm have really, learned lessons, done the work, improved processes, tightened due diligence to the point where you can feel happy that your claim is going to be correct, compliant, defensible.
Brilliant. Thanks, Suzanne. Really good stuff. The important, so I agree with you. It's an important part of a finance director and a practitioner as armament is you need to be able to offer this and need to be aware of it. It's a really important relief and very important to the UK economy as well. Panos, what would your piece of advice be?
Well, following up on Suzanne's excellent input, I would just like to stress and emphasize the added value that an experienced R&D advisor can offer to a client, to a CFO. So the added value here is not simply to identify qualifying activity, but actually building an auditable evidence architecture that preserves the connective tissue between the underlying technological fundamentals, the qualifying technical work undertaken to resolve uncertainty, and the resulting cost compilation. So in the end, we end up with a framework that is defensible, auditable, traceable, and ultimately compliant, and claiming for as much as a company should be claiming, not more, not less.
Brilliant. Really good advice. So it's about building that framework to answer the questions and to optimize the client's position, which is, I think, really important. And last, but by no means least, Glenn.
Well, very difficult acts to follow, but I'm going to say PCRT is your friend. Use it, refer to it, look at it through that lens, and actually challenge HMRC when they need to be challenged, inform your clients and keep them informed, but actually remember that is there to support you and provide you with a framework you can actually utilize. And it is important that it's kept modern and it's kept up to date.
Brilliant. Fantastic stuff. Really, really good. So we've got the support of the regulatory bodies as well, which is brilliant, which is, I think, what we all need. Guys, thank you so much for your time today. Glenn, Suzanne, Panos, really insightful, a really important area, an area that's becoming more and more prevalent again, which is really good, and very, particularly as the UK stabilises and starts to move forward in hopefully a more stable world. I know it's been very unstable recently, but guys, just to say thanks so much. If anybody has any questions whatsoever, please feel free to drop us a note at Ad Valorem, and we'll be able to jump on that and come back to you. In the meantime, thanks very much for joining us on this Ad Valorem Lumina podcast. If you like what you're seeing, hopefully you do, please feel free to subscribe on the link attached. Thanks very much.